Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Sanchez, and here we have Stephanie Kraft. Hi,
Hello.
Stephanie.
Hi.
Hi. So we are doing our video series here on this channel, Enlightened Connections, and our series is called Understanding Narcissism. Today's video, our third in the series, is Understanding Narcissism, the Effects. So we're just going to dive right into some of these effects that we can experience in our life if we come along the path of narcissist or narcissistic pathologies. And so, it's pretty simple. You'll probably recognize at least some, if not all of these traits in the challenging relationships and interactions of your life. And one of the first ones that we wanted to talk about, and I think it's just so important to talk about first because it's so prevalent, are trust issues. It's the issue of trust that these kind of pathologies can bring into our lives because when you're dealing with personality or pathology that's not grounded in reality, it can make you question your own reality tests. Like, is this true? Is this not true? I don't know where I stand with this person. Are the things that they say about me true? Am I this thing that they say I am, or am I a bad person? Maybe they say they are, that they say I am. So these are the kinds of things that the seeding of doubt into your consciousness that can actually affect your personality, your confidence, your performance in life. And so not only does that affect your self-trust, right, your ability to trust yourself, but it can also deeply affect your ability to trust others and your other relationships, because then you start to wonder, well, is that person also going to treat me like this person did? The projection and the fear mongering and the manipulation and control can start to wear down on the psyche and actually have that person expect that everyone is going to treat them like that, right? So that, oh, well, I can't trust anybody because I don't know what's true, what's not true, if they really love me or if they're just putting on a facade, or if I'm just crazy. All of that starts to go haywire, and it can really damage our relationships and our ability to connect with others. And so we'll talk about that more in a second. But I want to give you an opportunity, Stephanie, because I noticed you were getting engaged in that content. If you wanted to share a little bit about, anything on that or some of your own thoughts.
Not necessarily directly about the trusting others, but something about trusting yourself when you're in a prolonged relationship, exposure to a narcissist, because they have such a way of invalidating your feelings and invalidating what you say. You really do develop a sense of you develop the inability to trust your own feelings and your own judgments. So you don't know that they are valid. You don't know if what you're feeling or thinking is, real, has any basis, because you've constantly been squashed. The effects of a narcissist on someone, it feels soul crushing, and it squashes your self-esteem and your self-worth. So if you're growing up with that, or if you have a long-term relationship with somebody doing that, you lose the ability to trust yourself, your judgment. You feel like you don't have a voice, or you're afraid to speak up because you're so used to being invalidated that you feel that your voice, what you have to say, actually doesn't matter, and you lose the ability to speak up for yourself. So if you're growing up with that, growing up into adulthood with that, it's going back to that lack of trusting yourself that you were talking about. You tend to let people walk all over you, cross your boundaries, and sway you, kind of push you beyond your comfort zone, because you haven't learned that your voice is valid, that what you have to say matters. You have lost a sense of self-empowerment. So it kind of segues from what you were talking about with this trust issue, but I didn't really have too much more to go into it other than that. Do you have more to say about the trust issue?
No, I think that was a great addition, and I'm glad that you focused where you did, because those are some good areas to expound on.
Yeah, so let's see. We have a list here of things we want to talk about. Another one of them is feeling like people will be angry at you. So there's like a constant sort of subconscious record playing in your mind that, you know, you're walking on eggshells. Even not the narcissistic person, but anybody else in the world is gonna suddenly be angry at you for whatever reason. You feel like you might be upsetting people. You feel afraid that people are gonna turn on you or attack you, because this is how your life has been with the narcissist. And especially if you've grown up with it. I mean, I can speak more to the effects of having grown up with it versus being married to one, because that's my experience. So when you're a child and you're growing up with a narcissistic parent, that can really get instilled in you that people are going to be angry at you. Do you have more to say, anything to say about that?
Oh, I think, yeah, and there's so much I could say. Yeah, it's like that feeling of having the rug pulled out from under you.
Yes. Yeah, feeling that
very
at
common.
any moment people could turn on you.
It's like, oh, what, where am I going?
Yeah.
Constant anxiety. So yeah, and that's part of why I was thinking about that inability to connect with people, because, you know, how are you going to connect with someone if you're constantly expecting them to turn on you? You know, you can't actually develop intimacy if you're afraid of the person. And so these are the kinds of things that can happen as side effects when you're on the receiving end of this pathology for so long, because then it can actually start to erode your ability to trust in humanity. It starts to make you think that this is something that people are like, you know, you're associating like people with this person or this character trait, because you can see it. Actually, a lot of people do express this. So you could very easily make a case to say that, you know, it's taking over the world and, you know, there's no hope and all of that stuff. And of course, I don't believe that there's no hope, but it can be daunting if you are presented with this, especially because of the magnitude of it. And it can, from that level, it can actually affect your ability to connect with people, your own humanity, because you start to question, you know, the very nature of humans. You know, are humans naturally self-serving and vicious and, you know, all these selfish traits that the narcissist expresses? Or are we good, you know, which I believe is the truth of the matter. But if you're lost in that pathology, I think you can very easily go down that path and maybe not even return. You know, this is something else that I wanted to mention, is it can harden the heart of a person who's had to experience it. So I would say for sure, one way or the other, it will break your heart, you know, if you're on the receiving end of this, because of the soul crushing behaviors that you talked about, you know, the belittling, all of that stuff. Almost certainly it's going to break your heart. Now, whether it hardens your heart or just breaks it is really up to the individual, I think, and their own healing capacities and healing choices. Because I think it can actually, if it breaks when the heart breaks, it has an opportunity to heal and grow back stronger, right? That's one of the beautiful traits of the heart. But that has to be a choice. We have to choose to let go of the grief, let go of the pain, and move beyond it in order for that healing to happen. And for a lot of people, that does not happen. A lot of people do not see that it's possible to get beyond that pain, first of all. And then maybe, you know, even if they do see, maybe they just don't feel that they can, or whatever the thing. Some people may not get back from that pain, especially if they're unaware of this process and what's happening, you know. So it can be really, really insidious. It's almost like a mental virus. And I want to save that little point for my next talking point, but also give you a chance to say anything in reply to any of those.
Well, why don't you go ahead to the mental virus point?
Mental virus. Okay. Well, yeah. So in its pathological perfection, it almost replicates itself, right? And so this mental virus, you know, the seeding of self-doubt, insecurity, uncertainty, not being able to connect or trust others, all these things eventually build and build and build and become their own kind of pathology. So that, for example, you know, you may even start to develop narcissistic traits by having been on the receiving end of them for so long. In fact, that's one of the survival mechanisms that people who receive narcissistic abuse often employ after, you know, for, you know, I can say from my own experience, you know, having long-term exposure to this, that it will start to affect you on those deep levels. And because you're so inundated by it, it almost becomes maybe a subconscious mechanism to adapt those traits almost as a form of competition with that narcissistic energy source, just so that you can survive its wrath. You're just like, well, you're gonna meet it. It's either meet it or die in some of those circumstances. So it can start to spread itself from person to victim, or perpetrator to victim that way. So then you can start to see the victim behaving like the narcissist, right? And then, you know, it starts to just get worse. You know, again, it's starting to spread just like a mental virus. That narcissistic abuse can also not only lead to, you know, the traits being passed on, but it can also lead to severe pathologies. So it can actually help to create cluster B personality disorder, right? Which is on the very beginning spectrum of narcissism. So this is also part of that vicious cycle that we talk about. And, you know, I'll leave it here because I know, you know, this one we could talk about forever. But in that vein of creating more of itself, it can also even lead people who aren't actually true narcissists, but who have acquired some of the tendencies to question themselves nonstop. Am I a narcissist? You know, and if you're on this path, you probably, you know, are questioning everything about it. So you may have even questioned that for yourself. And it just in the nature of it, again, I know we've mentioned this before, but if you're asking that question, chances are you're not a narcissist by the very nature of being able to look at yourself. So just I'll leave it there. I want to talk a little bit more about the I am a narcissist dilemma in a moment, because I think that's a really important topic. But do you have anything you wanted to share or add to any of that?
Yeah, it's basically, I totally agree with you. I think that as a defense mechanism, people automatically, their narcissistic tendencies will grow if they have long-term exposure to a narcissist out of pure survival. And the narcissist will trigger that behavior in them when it's really not their nature. And so it's something to even, I read something or heard something once that said that a narcissist can literally drive another person insane. So, you know, and it's, you know, it's true. It can bring out the worst in someone because they're having to defend their very being and their own protection and sanity. And so it will bring out anger. It will bring out rage, self-defense, you know, emotionally, verbally. And in the narcissistic traits that come to the forefront. So it can also create borderline personality disorder with the hyperreactivity. Again, it's the same thing that we're talking about. And so, you know, sometimes, well, see, a narcissist is very good at manipulating the environment, which means other people to if they're feeling threatened that the person that they're abusing is waking up to the abuse and standing up to them and maybe, you know, distancing, they'll start to manipulate others in their environment, family, friends, whoever they all associate with, to turn those people against the victim. And so because the narcissist has triggered, you know, maladaptive behaviors in the victim or protective behaviors, it's easy to point the finger. See, he or she is crazy. See how she's acting, and without having seen the abuse, the outsiders, or they can even be pretty close insiders on the inner circle, will say, yeah, that person is overreacting, angry, and so it can get very twisted where the victim can be further blamed or, black sheeped, that's not a real word, by others. And so that's another compounding effect of dealing with a narcissist long term. So anything else about that you wanted to say?
I was wondering, could you call that gang stalking?
I don't know if I would put that term to it.
Okay, it just kind of reminded me of that. I wasn't sure if there was a connection with that word or not, so just never mind.
I don't really know what that word really means, but I thought it had.
Well, it's like ganging up on people, like getting a whole group of people to bring down one person, basically.
Yeah, I don't think that a narcissist does that intentionally to have a group of people come at someone, but I do think that they do try to manipulate everyone's opinion about that person if they feel that they're losing control. And so because they need to appear on top, always the winner, always the victim. And so, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the PTSD from the long-term exposure?
I do, actually. I'm gonna segue into that with the I am a narcissist dilemma, right? Because that can actually lead to PTSD, right? I mean, the exposure itself, all these traits that we've talked about so far, the pathologies, the behaviors, the expressions, these are all signs of mental illness. And the more you're exposed to mental illness, obviously the likelihood your own chances of exhibiting it go up, So with this very common, am I a narcissist dilemma? I went through that for myself when I started to awaken to this pathology of narcissism, what it is, because you hear about it all the time. You hear about Narcissus and the flower, and he fell in love with himself, and what does that really mean? And you hear people say that self-love is narcissistic also sometimes. So it's well, there's a lot of conjecture and confusion around the subject in general. But once I started to really ask myself this question, am I a narcissist? And then once I started to really look into the answers, despite my own fears of what I might find, I could see more and more about what the pathologies were, more and more about, these distinctions. And finally, once I understood the sheer presence or absence of compassion as being the characteristic defining trait, then I realized, okay, well, I can't be a narcissist because I do have compassion. For sure, I know that about myself. But the questioning, I use the term dilemma because it was a dilemma for at least 2 years. I had this dilemma of asking myself repeatedly, am I a narcissist? Am I a narcissist? And and so it affected, again, my ability to trust myself, other people, all the stuff we just went over. And it was really affecting my ability to connect with people and understand my relationships and my friendships even, because, well, basically I had attracted a friend who had these traits. And, I was at the earlier portion of my spiritual journey where it's okay, well, everyone's a reflection of me, right? And I didn't necessarily know exactly what that looks like. And that's true in a lot of ways, but there are some subtle nuances and complexities to that can lead to confusion if you don't understand them. And so because I saw these narcissistic traits in my friend, I had to ask, well, am I just seeing this in myself? Am I just projecting my own narcissism onto him? Is this, and so it was a long time. It took me to finally realize that we are all one, but we're not all the same. And even though we are all connected, we're all individuated. And so we have our own unique traits and places and, skills and challenges, and that his challenges were not mine. That they did, however, reflect some of those behaviors which I had, which helped me to understand that I acquired those behaviors because of my long-term exposure to this pathology. So I started to use that as a survival mechanism. So it was a huge sense of relief for me to understand all those complexities and nuances so that I could finally relieve myself of the burden of the guilt of thinking that I had this, pathology that I didn't. basically, you know, that I, you know, didn't have compassion, that I was further along, and, you know, that I just wasn't something that I'm not, you know. So once I understood that, it was like, okay, well, it also made it easier for me to recognize the pathologies, distance myself from them in an identity attachment sort of way, and say, oh, that's not me. These are just behaviors that I have acquired, and I can just as, you know, possibly unacquire them by shifting my behavior, by making new habits, new choices, and things like that. So that's the dilemma I think that a lot of people who are exposed to this pathology can go through, especially once they start to wake up to it. And that process of awakening, I think, does also involve, as you had asked about, Stephanie, PTSD. So I think everything that we've mentioned so far, it will kind of obviously create PTSD in a person, right? If you're exposed to all these things, especially over a long period of time, you know, even I think as little as it, depending, you know, if you spend a lot of time with this person, 2 weeks could be enough to start to really affect your psyche. You know, 6 months to a year, absolutely, you're going to be affected for a while, you know, never mind if it's ongoing for years or more. And the PTSD portion of it, you know, post-traumatic stress disorder, breaking it down, traumatic stress, right? So this is a traumatic stress that we are exposed to under these circumstances. And especially when it's repetitive, especially when it's denied and gaslit and all these other things, it can become deeply suppressed. It can become deeply disassociated, you know, all these different additional defenses that we can create just to make it through, because this is a heavy burden for anybody to go through, really. And especially when there isn't support or understanding. So it can be kind of dicey, especially when you don't know what you're dealing with. But once you start to awaken, then you start to see the full spectrum of it. And it's like, wow, I've been traumatized. I've been traumatized by these experiences to the point where I'm still carrying around that trauma. And, you know, you talked about, you know, expecting people to turn on you in any moment. That's a form of the PTSD, because you're projecting the trauma from the past into the future. You're expecting it at the moment's notice, because you're still at that moment, you're just like, I could be traumatized again at any moment, because that's what you've been through, as, you know, the collective view. That's what one has been through in those circumstances. So PTSD is a very common side effect of having been exposed to these pathologies. And, you know, it can even get into other deeper emotional, spiritual levels, which we'll talk about in a minute with psychic attacks. So yes. If there's anything that you want to add or abridge with any of that stuff.
Yeah. So to go into this PTSD a little bit more deeply, it can feel very much like the fight or flight response. So you have the fight or flight response as a constant, as a low grade constant feeling. This is that, you know, rapid heartbeat, that nervous feeling, anxiety, fear, worrying a lot. I think a lot of people retreat into their mind a lot, being hyper, you know, mental, trying to figure things out, falling into that anxiety, worry. It can create OCD behaviors, because once again, when you are exposed to narcissistic abuse, you're not good enough. So constantly being told you're not good enough, you internalize that. And a lot of people will turn to perfectionism because they're not feeling worthy, high achievers. There are a lot of people who grow up with a narcissist who become super achievers because they've internalized that they're not good enough. And so they're trying to prove to the outside world and to themselves that they are highly worthy, highly successful. And so, but what's going on with the lack of self-esteem is this low-grade constant anxiety as well. So what can happen over time, having all of these things within yourself, what I'm seeing, it's like an epidemic in my healing practice and my hypnotherapy practice, is that people who have spent years with a narcissist have chronic illness. So this shows up a lot of times as adrenal fatigue, chronic fatigue, even things like fibromyalgia could show up as other more severe illnesses. So chronic illness, sensitivities, and a lot of fatigue. So that's because their adrenal glands, their hormonal system has been on the fight or flight response, adrenal glands pumping too much adrenaline, they get fatigued. And because the endocrine system is connected, all the endocrine glands are connected to all the other endocrine glands, and the endocrine gland system is connected to all the other systems in the body, they begin to crash. They're all connected. So the immune system goes, and etc. And so people do develop a lot of illness having spent time with a narcissist. So it's very common. Hair falling out, a lot of things showing up physically. So this is all connected to PTSD that you're talking about. There can even be, mental trauma like flashbacks or what is it called? Intrusive thoughts, repetitive thoughts before the healing has taken place. So we're going to do future video on healing, but what else? Did you want to segue into another topic related to this?
Yes, and just to actually close up this one, because something occurred to me as I was listening to you share that, because I'm very familiar with adrenal fatigue myself, not only in my own experience, but also as an epidemic with most of my clients as well. In personal training, a lot of people, have lower back issues, which is in Chinese medicine, the kidneys, which is related. That's where the adrenals sit, right on top of the kidneys. And in Chinese medicine, the kidneys actually process the emotion of fear. Yeah. And so I think it's really interesting to look at it that way, because basically the narcissist lives in a state of fear. Yes. And spreads that fear into their environment. It's creating more fear for other people to live under and live in. And I just thought that was really poignant, because it's all about the spiritual journey, right? It's choosing love over fear, and eventually, shifting out of that fight or flight to the trust in life, the trust in humanity, all of that good stuff. So like you said, we're talking about the healing in our next video. So just as a little preview, I guess. Segueing that, the fear elements to all the narcissistic personality disorder, abuse, and things like that, a little maybe lesser known subject or lesser understood phenomenon. It's not quite in our colloquial lexicon yet, but we're talking about psychic phenomenon. So let me just describe briefly what we're talking about when we're talking about psychic. The word psychic comes from the Greek word psyche, which means the soul. So we're talking about things on a soul level. We can also talk about it about how, or as the soul expresses itself through the mind, right? The psyche soul is in the mind. It's not the mind, but it's within the mind. It uses the mind. And so when we're talking about the psychic attacks, we're talking about an energetic component. And let's just put it this way. One of the most common psychic phenomenon is, almost everybody's had this at least once in their life, where you're thinking about someone and then they call you, right? And there's lots of other things. You're thinking about a song, and then you turn on the radio, same kind of thing, right? In this way, we are all connected. Everything is one. And so this can actually happen in all of our relationships. It actually does, whether we're conscious of it or not. But if we are conscious of it, we can understand that this is actually a psychic phenomenon. And so, Stephanie, you actually referred to this a little bit when you were talking about intrusive thoughts. But I want to point out that these thoughts may not only be from the past, so to say, right? I mean, if you're talking about the holographic universe, there is no time, but we're still talking about time and space for right now. What I am talking about, I'll give a little bit of a story. So I had a partner that was very clearly a narcissist after the fact. I saw it very clearly. And after the very long breakup process of, disintegrating myself from that relationship, I felt a lot of those dynamics come back. And I mean the psychic dynamics, like the emotional, energetic, mental manipulations, the push and pull, to the point where I remember very vividly having left the presence of this relationship in person physically, but still dealing with the mentation. And it wasn't like I was thinking about just the past. I was also thinking about the future. Like, it's strange. I know it may sound a little too woo-woo, but I swear there was a conversation happening in my mind as if the conversation hadn't ended from our meeting. And it was still happening. And I felt the need to, in this mental conversation, which I'm going to call a psychic conversation, justify myself, explain myself why I didn't want to go back to the relationship. No, it wasn't going to work out. Like having to put up this boundary. And actually, I was getting texts at the time that corroborated with all of this energetic happenings. And then finally, I remember making this mental, it was very mental, but it's, you know, again, it's all connected, right? The soul, the spirit, the mind, it's all connected. So like internally, I made the shift and I said, no, I don't owe anything to this relationship. I am done. It's finished. And in that moment, the psychic attack stopped, meaning there was no more of the thoughts and the chatter and the text message. It all stopped. Because this is actually happening on a soul level, even though it may just seem like it's happening in the mind, or maybe you know, I was even questioning myself. I'm like, am I just making all of this stuff up right now? But I wasn't, because this is part of what happens. It's like you have this mental interaction as well. And oftentimes they're giving you, whether you realize it or not, the opportunity to stand up for yourself, the opportunity to say no, to set healthy boundaries, because that's part of our soul growth as well, to not let people take advantage of us and abuse us and things like that. So when you come to that place, you're actually coming to an energetic, powerful place that is psychically protected. And you say, no, you can't even enter my psychic space. You can't even enter my mind or my soul or any of that. You are rejected and, you know, denounced. So just to share a little bit about that.
And keep your thought there, what you're going to talk about next related to that. But I just want to tell everybody that Adam and I are going to do a video in our narcissism series on the purpose of narcissistic relationships that we experience. And what you're talking about right now does touch on that. Stepping into your power, commanding your space, mental space, soul space, all of that. So it's great that you touched on it, so we can let people know that we are going to talk about some of the benefits, if we want to call them that, right, of going through all of this at the end. That'll be our last video in the series. But why don't you go on to the next part about this whole psyche aspect?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. And, you know, if it wasn't already clear to someone who's listening to this conversation and, you know, finding all the delineations, but these psychic attacks can also be experienced as energetic drains, or like you've been exposed to an energy vampire.
Yes.
Because that's what it is. You know, they're just, again, that sort of black hole image, right? Like just like take. And that can leave the person who is a giving person, which the, you know, codependent or empath or person who gets in the path of a narcissist usually is. Yeah. And so they just end up giving for nothing, essentially, you know. Yes. And mostly the narcissist doesn't even appreciate it anyway. So
they love the energy, but not at an aware level of, you know. Yeah.
Right, to actually be grateful for it or to give back. So hence the pathology. So that's it. I just wanted to mention that. I don't know if you wanted to add something about that energy vampire component.
I would love to, because people can feel it. So when you, like in the beginning stages of, let's say, a romantic, it can even be a friendship. Like it doesn't have to be romantic, but like a new relationship with a narcissist can feel very compelling and magnetic, and you can feel excited to be engaging with that person. But so the narcissist somehow has the ability, because we haven't really touched too much on the spiritual aspects of it, like such as, is the narcissist such a vacuum so empty that they've opened themselves up to being hosted by an entity, for example. So the point is that, you know, whether it's just the individual operating with an emptiness inside, or there are other parasitic type entities that have hosted that person. This is an actual, you know, real possibility. But so it could be either or both, you know, both, that there's an energetic component to connecting with this person that can actually feel like an energy bubble. If you're a sensitive person, sensitive to energy, if you're an empath, highly sensitive person, you might become aware of this feeling of like all encompassing. All of a sudden you've met this person and it's like all encompassing and it's drawn you in. And the narcissists themselves, if it is a romantic relationship, can do something called love bombing, which is really showering you with a lot of words of affection, compliments, a lot of building you up. And you can get drawn into that. Also in non-romantic relationships, if it's a friend, they have the ability to suck you in and get you really connected. And so oh gosh, oh sorry, my computer just popped something up and didn't interfere with our recording, so that's great. It was just blocking the entire screen. So even though in the beginning it can feel uplifting, it's actually an energy drain. It's an actual draining of your life force. And eventually you begin to notice it, that when you've spent time with this person, you do feel drained of energy. You do feel fatigued. You do feel tired. You feel out of balance, out of sorts, ungrounded. And so there is a very strong energetic component to dealing with people like this. And and this energy drain can lead to illness, like I was saying before.
Yeah. Thank you so much for clarifying those points and connecting it to the illness too. I mean, it's all connected, right? This mental illness will lead to physical illness, psychospiritual illness as well.
Yeah.
A little pervasive. So
yeah, energy illness.
Yeah. So yeah, that energy drain can be real. And, we talked about the love bombing, and it's a little bit on the codependent spectrum as well. So we had talked about this. Narcissists are codependent, right? They do not have the real tools to, take care of themselves and be functional members of society, right? Hence the pathology. And that's why they take from others in manipulative ways and subversive ways. So they are codependent, but not all codependents are narcissists. So it's important to point that out, because someone could be expressing a codependent behavior or, energy in the love bombing. Maybe that even it sounds pretty codependent to me. But that doesn't necessarily make them a narcissist. So just pointing out that those are very close, but they should not be conflated, because there is a difference. And again, the presence of compassion is the key, and just keep a lookout. That's all I wanted to say on that.
Yeah. Did you have any other topics on this, the effects to go over? Okay. Yeah, I just glanced at my notes. I also don't. So I think we've covered it all. And this will help people. It's really hard to see this when you're in it. It can take time. But by listening to videos like this, it can help you understand more and more what you're dealing with and how it may have affected you in your life. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And once you understand those effects, then you can actually address them and deal with them. It's like the PTSD before. I had the PTSD myself, and I didn't even know for so many years that I had it. And once I finally realized, I was like, the gravity of the situation, I was like, wow. Not only did that give me the opportunity to have compassion for myself, like deeply, because it was so necessary, but then also to be patient with myself as I went through the healing process, because I understood that it was significant and that it required patience, time, compassion, and all of those elements.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it can be heavy, at the first blanch, but once you go through it, and once you have the awareness, that's I think the hardest part. And then the next challenge is just keeping that persistent over time with patience and practice and the awareness growing, and that compassion. Just let the compassion flow.
You brought something up that reminded me of something that I had been through, and I'm going to go ahead and share it because I think it's helpful. I think that sharing stories of experience can be helpful for other people to say, oh my gosh, me too, or have the ability to look at their experiences and identify what it is they're going through. So you mentioned you had PTSD and didn't even know it. Well, so did I. And I was living in an apartment, and the person below me was extremely mentally ill and screamed at the top of her lungs all day. And I lived there for like 2 years, not even registering it, that it was a problem, because I was so used to it, but I was unconsciously feeling the effects of the screaming. Okay. But I don't know what flipped it for me, but something did. I think it was that she had a man start coming who was also doing the screaming, and it got to the point where I actually thought that they were going to kill each other. I mean, it was very severe, and I called the police several times. I was very scared there was going to be a murder in that apartment. But yeah, what happened was, and that was just a few occasions when I would hear the male voice there, but all the time it was the female, and the sound came up through the vent in my bedroom. So I was hearing it all the time when I was in my bedroom. Well, when it flipped for me, when it clicked that this was causing me extreme like PTSD, I understood that it was linking me back to my childhood. And I had like kind of a breakdown where, crying, and the PTSD came to the surface. So I realized what was happening, that I was releasing inner child wounds and pain and fear from my life. And I ended up going to a counselor once just to be able to have support because this was like an episode, right? So the point is that we can be having ongoing PTSD and not even know it until something happens. And this is what happened to me. And then luckily for me, it was like a release, and then it was gone. And I sent a lot of love into that apartment, and she moved out. I think it was because of the love I was sending down there, and she couldn't handle it because she was like kind of evil, you know what I mean?
Shamanic magic.
Yeah. So I was like, let me just shower her with love and the whole apartment, and like right after that, she moved out. But we have to look at things metaphysically, because there's a reason that these things happen in our lives. There's a reason that presence was there for me. It was for me. Not that it's all egotistical and everything's about me, but kind of we are.
We're each the center of our own universe.
Yeah. So it was an opportunity for me to finally release this something that I was holding inside, and also not tolerate behaviors, because I took a stand. I was calling the police several times because I couldn't handle it anymore, and it got out of hand. And I took matters into my own hand with sending the love energy, and it worked. But it's important to, once we realize that we have the PTSD, get help. There are ways. We'll talk about that in the healing video, which we're going to do next. But this is like just about awareness and allowing yourself, let yourself look at yourself. Are you experiencing, anxiety, stress, anxious dreams, things like that? And then, it's be forgiving and do get help for these types of things.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, Stephanie. I think you brought it on home.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, I guess that's the end of this video, everybody. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Enlightened Connections. Like the videos, share them, and we will see you in the next one.
Yes, and if you have any comments, questions or things that you'd like us to talk about in the videos, please feel free. We're open open. We're taking, you know, input from people. So make a comment, let us know.
Yes. Thank you, Adam. Bye.
Thanks, Stephanie. Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching.
See you soon.